Hey everyone, welcome to the Powered by Iron Health podcast, where we're here to create a community that raises the standard of health and wellness. Today we got a very special topic. We're going to be talking about programming in the gym. We get a lot of questions about it, so we're going to deep dive into certain things, talk about our programming, how we evaluate, and then how you should create your program based on your goals. So Alina is going to kickstart us with some programming advice.
Cool. So at Iron Health, we have a program called Small Group Personal Training, and we also do personal training. And the way that we structure our program is typically with functional strength training. So that is definitely something in the last few years that has been kind of coming out as a style of programming. CrossFit really put it on the map, functional training. And the concept is it's training that carries over into our day-to-day activities of life. So things like farmer's carries are my favorite example. You're carrying two either kettlebells, dumbbells. There's bars that are specifically made for carries, maybe a trap bar, and you're loading weight on either side most of the time, or sometimes you can mimic holding an imbalanced object. So you could do a single arm carry, you can do an overhead carry. The point is that it's something that you would do outside of the gym and you're mimicking it in your training so that you can build the strength and the stamina to perform that same movement outside of the gym. The way that we do this at Iron Health is we always have a warm-up, a dynamic warm-up where we're moving the body, we're moving the joints, and we spend about 10 minutes doing a dynamic warm-up, and that's gonna hit the whole body, get the blood flowing, get the muscles going, a little bit of stretching, just isolating certain muscles. And again, dynamic just means consistent movement versus a static stretch where you're holding a position to get deeper into the muscle. After our warm-up, we always hit a core superset. We base our programming off of supersets. We couple two movements together. And the goal of the superset can be either you're really targeting a muscle group for fatigue, or you're targeting two separate muscle groups, a protagonist and an antagonist. And for the superset for core, it's not things just like sit-ups. There's usually a plank component or a modified plank for people who can't do a plank. And then we also do things like dead bugs, bird dogs, things that are warming up the whole trunk of the body. And then also other joints that are attached to the trunk. And then we will typically at that point go into either a compound lift or we'll do a functional superset. And we do accessory work based on the compound lift. And if we're doing a full body functional workout, then we'll do movements that are more focused on balance or impact or plyometrics. So at Iron Health, again, for our small group training program, we'll take a muscle group and we'll take that structure that I just explained, the warm up, a core superset, compound lift, and then some accessory work, and we'll base it off of the muscle group that we're working on. That's what we do at Iron Health, but we also do one-on-ones and we program for ourselves for our own workouts, and that's important too. And that's why we wanted to talk about programming today, because when you go to either a training program or you go to a gym, there's, everyone claims to have like the best workout, right? And really, it depends on what your goals are. And if your goal is to just improve your overall quality of life, or if you want to focus specifically on an imbalance or preventing injury, it's important to know what your goal is. If your goal is weight loss or just building muscle and strength, it's important to know what your goal is to make sure that you're creating or finding a program that is structured around your goal. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. Joe has been on a really amazing weight loss journey since the beginning of the year. And since then, he started two workout cycles, like two structured cycles. One was more hypertrophy training, so we'll talk about that. And then also training for weight loss. So why don't you go into that?
Yeah, so we'll dive into each of these specifically just to educate. I think that's the most important thing. Before we dive into those, because there's so many out there, it's so confusing. It's like, what should I be doing? Should I do this? Should I do that? And then people just get discouraged and don't do anything. Mm-hmm. So I guess if we let's start with Iron Health first. Like, for us, when people come in through our door, what's the biggest goal do you think people have that fit into this functional kind of training modality?
So I would say when we sit down with people, they first join our program or they're showing interest, we'll always ask them what their goals are. Typically, the goals that we see the most are building strength and muscle, and I'll always ask people specifically what that looks like for them because that looks very different person to person. And then the other thing that people will typically say is weight loss. So those are the two goals that I see and hear the most of. And a third goal, again, is preventing injury. The way that people say it is different across the board. Some people, their goal is longevity as well. So I guess that's the top 4 goals. Those are the 4 I hear the most. Longevity, injury prevention, weight loss, and just building muscle and strength, which I think kind of falls into longevity and preventing injury, but people will just blatantly say building muscle and strength.
Yeah. So when someone comes in and talking to you about that, and then for our programming, what does a cycle look like? And for people who don't know what a cycle is a X amount of time where you're doing, like, let's say you have different exercises a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you're doing 3 different exercises that week. The next week you're doing the same and seeing if you're progressing, right? Is that the correct way to say a cycle? So we kind of have cycles within our own programming as well. So how do we look at that and say we're going to have a cycle of X and then change it to Y? What does that look like? And why do we do that?
So we do it for progression, right? And building strength, really, in order for you to see progress, you almost want to stick to the same things, which isn't always fun and sexy, but it's how you know you're progressing. If you're doing a back squat weekly or a landmine squat, if you're not ready for a back squat, or you have injuries that would prevent you from doing a barbell back squat or a leg press or a sled push, those are all lower body weighted movements where you're pressing and also they're loaded. So those can be all variations of one movement pattern in essence, with, again, variations making them a little different. So the reason that we stick to the same movement in a cycle is to see progress. Did we go up in weight? How does that feel on our body? Is this now more doable for us than it was a week ago, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago? At Iron Health, what we'll do is we usually do a 6-week cycle. So the movements in our exercises, our workouts will change, but we'll consistently have one movement that we keep the same to track the progress of that movement over a 6-week cycle so that we can see progress in that lift. And you might not see it week to week, but you might see it week 1 on this cycle and then week 1 on the next cycle. So that's where the magic happens. For people that have had injury, you might see progress in not being able to do a movement and then over a cycle, now getting into the cycle again, being able to do the movement that you couldn't do earlier. So it could be a back squat. Maybe somebody wasn't able to do a landmine back or a landmine squat even, and now they can do from the leg press to a landmine squat. And that's where you would see progress. So that's why we do cycles. And it is really important. Again, at Iron Health, we'll do a 6-week cycle. We take a deload week. So a week where we don't touch any barbells. We'll still do movements that are going to strengthen certain muscle groups, and then we'll go back into the cycle and repeat it so that we can specifically see progress in that lift. And typically with a cycle, what you'll see is a movement with a set and rep scheme. So let's say, again, a back squat, you're doing 3 sets of 10 reps, and then the next week, maybe you're doing 3 sets with 8 reps. So you can go up and weight a little bit. Maybe it's 5 pounds, maybe it's 10, maybe it's more. Then maybe it's nothing actually. Then the next week you would do 3 sets of 6 reps. So you're working your way down in repetitions, you're working your way up in volume. Maybe you have an AMRAP, which is as many reps as possible. So you're pushing volume with more weight, and that's also how you can progress.
So 6 weeks is our traditional cycle, and then a deload week, and then it's a new cycle, or is that the principles of that?
So the cycle will repeat itself so that you can specifically see progress.
And how often do we do that?
Quarterly. So every quarter we'll have a cycle, a strength cycle, and then the sets and reps will stay the same for the quarter. We'll do a 6-week cycle. Sometimes it's 5 weeks, it's usually 6, a deload week, and then we repeat that cycle again.
Gotcha. So that's good. So every quarter we're pivoting to then either add a new compound lift or change something up based on the feedback from the clientele, right?
Compound lift will always stay the same. We always do squats, deadlifts, shoulder press, and bench press. How we structure it changes.
So give me an example.
So let's say one cycle, one quarter 1, for instance, we're doing 3 sets of 12 reps. Week 1. Then week 2, we're doing 3 sets of 10 reps. Then week 3, we're doing 3 sets of 8 reps, and so on and so forth. Then we get to deload week. Okay, then we repeat that cycle until we get to the end of the quarter. The next quarter, we would be doing 3 sets, 10 reps, plus an AMRAP set. Still work our way down week 2, 3 sets, 8 reps with an AMRAP. So now we're pushing volume. So we built a baseline in quarter 1 where we know, okay, if I can hit 3 sets of 10 reps with 100 pounds on the bar, like keep it easy. Now I'm going into quarter 2 after quarter 1, my weight increased just a little bit with the second round of the cycle. Maybe now I can do 3 sets of 10 reps at 115. I'm gonna do 3 sets of 10 reps at 115, and then my AMRAP, I'm pushing maybe 12 reps. So I have more volume with that weight, and then that also helps progress over time. So it's probably a little challenging, honestly, now that I'm saying it, to hear it. Like, this is probably something really good to see written out versus hearing it. This sounds like a complicated math problem to a person who doesn't do math a lot. So I'm not a math girly, so it's definitely, speaking it, I understand it because it's
our world.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the bigger things, you know, for clarity purposes of like what we're doing, and then I don't know, when I talk to people, the questions I always get are why certain reps, why certain sets versus others. And I think that's something we could dive into specifics of our training modalities, and then we can go into the other ones as well. But then also, like, let's take someone who's either with us or is interested in being like, I want to change my life. What is a good frequency for them? So let's start there. Like, what's a frequency for people to actually go and do this type of training? Because it's very more advanced than just going to the gym and doing machines, right? So what's a frequency, and how important is tracking to this?
Okay, so frequency depends on the person, depends on the goal, and it really depends. It depends, right? I always like to tell people at least 2 times a week, and you're supplementing with walking or something outside of just training with us. If you have the availability, 3 times a week is great. Baseline. Weight training is amazing. Our sessions usually run 40 to 50 minutes, sometimes closer to an hour. So you're thinking, 2 to 3 hours a week is bare minimum, because that's really not a lot compared to what you're doing outside of the training time. Now, for people who've never done this type of training before, even 1 time a week is going to make a difference, right? Like adding strength training, adding load, adding movements that you haven't done before that are isolating muscle groups, that's going to make a difference. Is it ideal? Not really, but it's better than nothing. And that's what I tell people too. And they're like, oh, well, I can't really come more than once a week. That shouldn't be an excuse not to start. 1 time a week is better than doing nothing and not having that consistency in your weekly routine. So that's what I would say in terms of frequency for people that are doing these types of movements and exercises.
And I totally agree. 1 time a week, we're talking about it because this is our world. We can dive into this and have conversations that are deep about sets and reps. Oh, that was my other question. We'll dive to that. But if you're new, like Alina just said, 1 time a week is better than nothing. And then what happens is you start to create this pattern in your life, and you start to feel better, and then you start to increase it slowly, and then you become a totally different person. And health really is like, fitness is like a gateway drug, they like to say. It's like it opens up the world to say like, oh man, what else can I accomplish? I mean, we're examples of that. If I don't work out in the morning, my days can be shot, because if you work out throughout the day, then it's like, you accomplished something that you did yourself. It's like very valuable. But for sets and reps now, so there's totally different schemes. How do we choose our schemes, and why do we choose them the way we do?
I mean, I would say, to be completely honest, and again, it depends on the person. We're not training powerlifters. That's not who we're training. We're training men and women who want to build strength and improve their longevity and their, quality of life. So sets and reps are, and you asked about tracking. Sets and reps are, I wouldn't say they're arbitrary, because they're not, but it's a baseline. Like, we're starting at 10 or 12 or 8 reps for the cycle, and then we're decreasing those reps and adding weight. So again, if we're thinking about adding weight and we're thinking about building strength, that's why we stick to these cycles, because it keeps things organized and structured and streamlined. And for somebody who's looking to build muscle, if you're just throwing them different things each week, it's, how do you know that what you're doing is working if you're doing random stuff just haphazardly? And for some people, maybe they like that. Maybe they like the variety of that. You know, we do bring variety into our programs in other ways, but that's why we have the sets and reps that we choose. Typically throughout the workout structure outside of our compound lifts, I will put a rep range on the programming, or our trainers will put a rep range. And the reason we do a range is because Joe and I might be working out in the same session. His goal is building strength, or again, weight loss, and my goal is building strength for our baby, right? So for him, he might be doing more volume, a little bit lighter than his heaviest weight. For me, maybe I'm pushing a little bit more load, a heavier weight, and doing less reps. So for instance, if it's a dumbbell shoulder press, I'm doing 8 reps at 25, 30 pounds, which is heavier for me, and he's doing maybe the same weight, but more reps, or he's doing it for a minute. So timing it to try to get his heart rate up, not necessarily worrying about reps, just doing an AMRAP. And the trainer in that session can say, all right, Joe, you're gonna do this as an AMRAP. Alina, you're gonna do 8 to 10 reps, feel it out, choose a heavy weight. If you do 8 reps and it feels like you can squeeze out 2 more without losing form, then go for another 2. If you can't, then stay at 8 and stick there for the rest of the workout. So that's how that is how we program, with giving a rep range for accessory work in particular. In terms of tracking progress, again, totally depends on the person. So we have a old school black and white sheet where our members that do want to track their weights can write down how much weight, how much load they lifted, and for how many reps. And then this way they can track over time. Some people like to put it in their phone. Some people just really don't care, and they just want to come in, do their workout, feel good about what they lifted, and every day is going to be different, and they're okay with that it really doesn't matter to them. They're like, all right, today I feel a little tired. I'm not going to push myself as much with the weights, but I'm just glad I got here. So it really depends on the person.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer, because some people don't want to track, and it's more about, that's why you have a coach, right? Like having a good coach goes a long way. So with our model, do you have any specific examples of people who really changed their life based on our programming? I think it'd be good for people to hear that.
Yeah, I have a few. There's one woman, her name's Deb. She just recently did a testimonial for us. She came in, she does window treatments, custom window treatments. So for work, she's hunched over a lot over a work table. And when she's doing installments, she has to lift weird, heavy objects they're not weird objects. They're heavy objects. They're weirdly shaped. They're awkwardly shaped, right? She loves a functional component of what we do. Her balance has improved. Her back pain has improved. Her strength overall has improved. And now she gets excited about things like she wasn't able to lift the 5-gallon water jug up, right? That's an awkwardly shaped object, like one of those pull and spring water bottle. I don't even know if they're 5 gallons or what, but
I don't know what they are. They're big though.
They're big and they're awkward, and they can be heavy. And she was able to lift it up and put it in the dispenser, and she was so excited about that. Farmer's carries is something she's really working on now, and she wants to build up to a heavy farmer's carry. I think she's close to 53 pounds, or if she isn't close, she's already gotten there. So she's a great example. I also have clients that have been training with me for years, and I love working with them because I love when they come in and they'll be like, I'm sore from this workout that we did the other day, which means that they're increasing their weight, they're progressing their weight, they're still getting inputs that are creating a reaction in their body where their muscles are getting fatigued and sore. So again, we could be throwing them an AMRAP to get their heart rate up and to get them into a fat burning zone, or it could be more strength based. But a couple clients in particular that I have, we have a 6 a.m. crew in one of our locations, and I'm grouping them as a crew. They've either lost weight, build muscle and strength. Some of them have worked out through menopause, or they're in perimenopause, and working out makes a huge difference for huge hormonal shifts like that in women's lives. So I worked out with a client before who actually lost weight during menopause, just by cleaning up her diet, taking away processed foods, and strength training. So the proof is in the pudding.
For sure.
And if you're unsure, I would recommend trying to start strength training, and you'll see for yourself.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, because a lot of people have a misconception about strength training. When people think about strength training, they think about Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? And granted, listen, like we can dive into that programming. We could talk a little bit about that but he did change the entire industry when he started to take the fitness kind of realm on and came into America and made bodybuilding like a very, very big thing. Like he changed the industry. So we still have the conception of bodybuilding when we think about strength training, and a lot of people, particularly women, are like, I don't want to look muscular, right? That does become a thing. But what Arnold did was a bodybuilding training is completely different, right? They're working completely on hypertrophy, which is muscle building. So traditionally they'll have reps between 8 to 15, very heavy, one body part at a time, where it's the opposite of functional training, right? Would you say so?
Yeah.
So it is a good training modality, but what are your goals? Like if you want to be on stage and be a bodybuilder, it's a totally different level. And most lay people aren't going to get those muscles just from doing functional training, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, there's a lot that goes into stuff like that, not just the training component. It's what you're putting in your body, from food to additives, if you will.
Yeah, so do we have people, or have you had people who said that before, like they're fearful of putting muscle on?
Yeah, I mean, that I haven't had it recently actually, but definitely, more probably like pre-COVID for some reason. It was more, I think people are just really into their health now, but before people would be like, well, I want to work out, but I don't want to put on too much muscle, and it takes a lot to really put on muscle like that for a woman to look really, really buff, if you will.
Yeah, for sure.
So
Again, depending on the goals, but like that hypertrophy training, that bodybuilding training, they'd be in the gym for maybe 2 hours sometimes, right? And they're doing isolated movements. They're not doing supersets. And supersets, all they are is just two things back to back. They would do, let's say they would do something on a cable row for the back. They would do 4 to 5 sets, 15 reps of progressively increasing the weight. And they would do that, 4 to 6 or 7 exercises per body part. And then they would hammer away at that every single day. Like the split there is a little different too, where they're training pretty much every day because they're training different body parts. Where functional, it really is more full body. You're hitting everything, but it's more full body.
it's more dynamic movements and super isolated.
For sure, yeah, and that's the key, right? Like you want to be strong. I know at the end of the day, most people just want to be strong and healthy, right? And functional training is life. Like it equates directly to life, where true hypertrophy training equates to gaining muscle, which isn't bad either if that's what you like to do, but that's a big difference there. And it's a totally different programming level. And then you also have training for fat loss, right? And I know functional does contribute its involvement in there because you said you do a lot of supersets.
So does hypertrophy training though.
That's
because
true.
when you start to build muscle, your body requires more energy. There's higher energy requirements for sustaining muscle than there is fat.
Yeah.
So, I mean, but yes, if you're looking to target fat loss, you want to get into a certain heart rate zone based on your individual heart rate zone, what your max heart rate is and what you're capable of. And you are taking, like that's HIIT training or endurance training is good for fat loss.
And what is HIIT training for people who don't know what that is?
So high intensity interval training is training, you're doing a movement or a set of movements for a set time frame, and then you have a set time frame of rest directly after that time frame of movement. And typically, you want your rest ratio to be less than your movement ratio. You don't want more than a 1-to-1. And a 1-to-1 could be like 2 minutes of work. You really don't want 2 minutes of work, 2 minutes of rest, because then your heart rate's almost coming down too much unless you have very, very, very intense 2-minute intervals. You could do a 1-to-1, but you really don't want more than that. So that's HIIT training. You're working for a set period of time, let's say a 45-second interval, you're resting for 15, or you're working out for a 5-minute interval and then you're resting for a minute and a half, and then going back into another interval.
Fat loss training is more geared toward interval training to keep your heart rate at a higher level, because fat burning happens at a certain level of heart rate. Is that?
Yes, you'll usually burn more fat at a certain heart rate level. Or if you also incorporate strength there, so you're lifting load, getting your heart rate up by lifting a heavier load, dumbbells, kettlebells, whatever it is. And then again, you're taking less rest. So maybe it's not as structured as HIIT training where you're doing a work to rest ratio, but you're taking less rest in between sets. So you're keeping your heart rate up. You want your heart rate to be up. That's going to create that effect in your body.
So it becomes twofold then. It's like you're still exercising, but you're keeping your heart rate at a certain pace to actually hit a fat burning zone.
Correct.
Yeah, and I guess that makes a lot of sense. And duration of those, would you say for a workout, 45 minutes to an hour is sufficient?
For HIIT, you don't need more than like 20,
Yeah.
30 minutes, honestly. If you're really pushing yourself, you really don't need more than 20, 30 minutes. You can have an effective HIIT training workout in 15 to 20 minutes, but you honestly don't even want more than that. At a certain point, it all has to do with like energy source too, in your muscles, the ATP, and when that, like when you're taking the glucose in your body and it's being burned and used, it's scientific, and we can get into that if people want, but on a baseline level, it really just has to do with how are you using the energy in your body, how much are you getting your heart rate up, how efficient are you at letting your heart rate come back down and then getting it back up again. But if you're working out really tired and you're lifting load like weight, that's when you can start to see injuries, which is a great segue into injuries right now. But you don't need to do a HIIT workout for 45 minutes to an hour. Maybe with a cool down and a warm up, sure, but it's really not necessary. Endurance training is a little different. If you're cycling, distance cycling, or running, distance running, sure. But again, that has to do with energy stores, and that's why you might hear people that are runners being called skinny fat, because at a certain point, they go through a lot of glucose, and then their body will start to feed on their muscles, which is what is made up of protein and whatnot, and then that's why they look skinny fat. So different training goals, right? If you're a marathon runner, you don't necessarily want to put on a ton of muscle because it might slow you down. So there's just certain things to consider.
Yeah, that's why it's important to consult a professional to understand like your goals, so you're not just guessing, going to Dr. Google, like I like to say. And before we dive into injury prevention, I just want to touch a little bit on too. You said something before about powerlifting. And for people who don't know what that is, that's when you're truly lifting for strength gains. And a lot of those reps are like, it's the opposite spectrum of the fat loss, where you're doing 3 to 4 to 5 reps and then taking 2-3 minute breaks because you need all the energy to actually push a way heavier weight. It's very different modality wise. Like, you have your functional, which you talked about, you have your hypertrophy, bodybuilder type, you have your fat loss, and then you have the other extreme, which is power. Like, how do I just generate as much strength as possible?
And Olympic lifting too.
Olympic lifting is its own animal. Like, I really think Olympic lifting is one of the hardest things you could do in the gym. And I don't think it's for everyone,
Definitely
honestly.
not.
I don't think it's for everyone because it's so dynamic, so kind of multiple joints moving at the same time, explosive. Like,
very explosive.
It's cool. It's a cool thing to do. I used to Olympic lift a lot, so I know it, but it's a totally different training modality that requires a lot more focus if you really want to do that. And it's important, what Alina said before, understanding your goals and like your principles of how you want to progress and what your end goal is, so you can be aligned with a particular program, is so important. And with that, we'll kind of move into the injury prevention, because obviously at Iron Health, we're not just training. We have a big modality of that, but throughout the years, we're also PT, right? Because throughout the years, I've seen most of our people who come in for PT are active individuals, right? And they're into fitness and they're into health, and they want to make sure that whatever they doing is preventing their injuries from coming back, so they can get back into the gym. So it's kind of a perfect segue. So injury prevention, regardless of your programming, has to be a part of it. You have to be doing some sort of injury prevention in your exercise regimen. Alina was talking about our programming and the functional training. The warm-up, as kind of slow and mundane as it is so crucial to make sure you're going to prevent injuries, right? What else would you say in that category? Because I think there's two things we could talk about. Like, how do we prevent the injuries, and then how do we, if we have tweaks and pains, how do we manage those injuries without shutting down completely? Because unless it's something severe, a severe injury, I'm not against shutting down people completely. I think there's a lot of modifications with a good coach and a good team where you can modify appropriately to stay healthy and actually get better. So what are kind of your thoughts around that?
So I think in terms of injury prevention, a big one is unilateral training. So working single-sided movements where you're isolating a muscle group on one side of the body, because balance imperfections or imbalances, I should say, are a big reason why we can sustain injury, and then we'll compensate with the other side. And if you do get injured, you typically will compensate with the other side or a different muscle group to, alleviate some of that pain. So doing unilateral movements is huge. Doing movements that work on the muscle surrounding a certain joint, if you have a joint injury, or if it's another muscular injury, you're not, maybe instead of doing a loaded movement, you're doing a body weight movement. So you're not using that muscle group, but you're just taking a step back, regressing, building the strength there. If it's too strained, then maybe you're not doing that for a couple of weeks, but then you can start to ease back into it. So in terms of injury prevention, well, I just talked about a little bit about when you are training with an injury too, but unilateral movements that focus on balance and that isolate certain muscles that are surrounding another muscle group or a joint.
For sure, I totally agree. I think the unilateral or one side exercises is so crucial. There's so many people that come in to me for PT that have pain when they squat, and when I deep dive, it's like one side that's really the outlier that we need to address. So a lot of that programming is focused on re-strengthening one side versus the other and saying, can you get into this position? Look at this side versus this when you do this movement, and then you just hammer away at that. Because if you're gonna do compound movements and you have asymmetries with one leg, you're gonna get injured. Like there's a higher likelihood you're gonna get injured. I'm not gonna say you're gonna, but there's a highly likelihood you're gonna get injured. I would say there's other components too. For me, when I look at injury prevention, you strip it down to what are the mechanics of the body, right? Like I look at a couple things. First layer is your joints, right? Now, your joints all have certain ranges of motion they have to get to be a successful joint. Like let's take your knee, for example. You should be able to get to at least 125 degrees of bending it. Now, if you're not able to do that on one side or you are on the other, imagine when that shows up when you put weight in your hands and do a squat, like you're gonna load that. So having some sort of joint routine where you're actually warming up the joints is so important because that's your base level. And just think about the dreaded word of arthritis, right? Like arthritis gets worse as you get older. So the best way to handle arthritis is to prevent it from happening. And the way you do that is lubricate the joint. On a very deep dive level of what the joint is, like each joint has fluid in it, they have ligaments in it, and there's cartilage there where the bones hit the bone. You need to make sure that fluid's moving. I don't know about you, but usually the first time when you wake up in the morning, you're tight. Like I work out in the morning, and if I don't warm up, my joints are gonna hurt because the fluid's not even up yet. So getting your joints mobile, and there's so many different things you can do. From my perspective as a PT, I look at it as how does a joint move, and then how do I facilitate that movement to just help with the joint moving. But from a fitness regimen, if you're limited on time, a dynamic warm-up is so important, right? You gotta wake your system up. And what you were talking about with our programming, which I really like, is that dynamic warm-up then flows into some core because you're hitting a double kind of warm-up before you hit a compound movement. Because a compound movement is a lot. Like your joints have to be ready to handle, if you're doing a back squat or a shoulder press, your joints have to be ready to handle that. If you go into that cold, that's when injuries do happen. So I look at the joints first, then I look at tissues and looking at flexibility, extensibility, looking at how does the tissue feel. And there's different things you can do. If you're like, hey, my calves are really tight, like you actively have to put some sort of tissue work into your programming, whether it's foam rolling, going to a PT or something like that to get hands-on to open those up. Then you look at the nervous system, right? There's different layers. It's like, do I have the mobility? Do I have the joint mobility? Do my tissues move? And my nervous system is just not connecting fully? I see that a lot. We call that neuromuscular retraining in essence. Like, okay, you have this motion. On an exam, I know you don't have anything that's glaring that gives me a red flag, but you just can't connect. So how are we gonna force these things to connect and get your nervous system kicked in?
How does that even happen that you can become disconnected in that?
There's a lot of ways, so I always tell people the number one reason for an injury is a previous injury. So if you've had an injury, and I'm gonna call out men because this is a men, like a very common with men is shoulder injuries. Men get shoulder injuries early in their 20s and it goes away. It's like they just get shoulder pain, they're like, it'll be fine. And it goes away, it does. But then it comes back in their 30s, it lingers a little bit and they're like, hey, this is lingering now, what's happening? And then in their 40s, that's when you start to see rotator cuff tears and stuff like that. But that started in their 20s, right? So as soon as it started, you know what happened? Your body's smart. If I have an injury in my shoulder and I'm trying to lift my arm, my body's gonna figure out a way to lift it. And the way it's doing it might not be the appropriate way or the appropriate movement or firing the correct muscles. So that's where it starts to facilitate. You can also have it from, our society, we're sitting so much. You have the glutes just kind of shut off, right? It's like we're sitting on them all day, every day.
Using them, yeah.
So that can be a factor as well. It can be from sport. Let's say when you were younger, you were playing field hockey or lacrosse and one leg was in front of the other and you always used one leg more. You're more likely to have one side that's not as strong. So there's so many variables that shut off the nervous system. It could be a deeper injury too, like a back injury or something like that. So there's a lot of variables there.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing when you look at the nervous system.
Yeah, that's something that I haven't really tapped into as much as I could.
Yeah.
Which is cool.
Yeah, it's definitely that's more geared to the PT side, but it's important for people to know that
sure.
These are things that I should look at for prevention, right? And how is my body moving? The shoulder is probably the biggest culprit because in reality, the shoulder is only attached to the body by the SC joint. Everything else is floating. So if you have one asymmetry there, now as you're going to move and do things, your shoulder blade's going to move a funky way. Maybe your rhomboids or your traps are firing too much and you have to release them. Maybe your rotator cuff's a little stretched. Maybe posture from work, we're sitting too much. There's so many variables in there. And just understanding that component can take you a long way. But these are more advanced injury kind of prevention techniques. The base level of making sure your joints are good and your tissues are good and you're actively warmed up are massive. And there's so many different tools to do that and different ways to do that that I think are really cool. One thing that's out there as well is getting a screen. We do something called the functional movement screen, or I take someone through a full body screen to see where their asymmetries are. And from there you could say, hey, listen, your left shoulder doesn't move as much as your right. And now if you go and you put a barbell underneath you and you're doing a shoulder press or a bench press, those may pop up even more. So you start to see where their baseline is and then you do your best to make them as symmetrical as possible. Now, symmetries kind of could be a myth too because everyone's a little asymmetrical. But if you see anything glaring, you're like, hey, maybe you should just work on this, this, and this because that will help you with your mobility as you go to train. But it's so important. And I also think having an appropriate cool down is necessary too. You're putting your body through a workout and it's intense, especially if you're lifting heavy, which even with all the lifting modalities we discussed are challenging to the system. And your body's natural tendency is to tighten up. So if you don't cool down and stretch and warm and just bring it back down to a base level, that tightness is going to stay. And so those are different ways to have injury prevention. Now, for training with injuries, or do you have anything else in prevention-wise?
No, I think I'm impressed.
I'm smart sometimes. So training through an injury. I think this is, like I was saying before, a lot of our people who come in for PT are active people. I had a woman not too long ago who was super active. She goes to the gym 4 or 5 times a week. She's a runner. She's a swimmer. She had shoulder pain. It happened from some regular everyday activity, but she had shoulder pain. And she's like, hey, I really want to swim. I'm coming here to talk to you about how can I continue to swim and not hurt my shoulder, right? So we did a deep dive, and it's okay, your injury is really coming from your chest. So let's look at every single swimming stroke and tell you can't do this one, and this one. So you can still train through an injury. Unless it's something severe. There are times where I shut people down. I will say that. There are certain injuries where you have to shut down. But if it's a little tweak or something that was minor, you can train around it. And you can actually build in some of the recovery and PT stuff into your programming. And that's where having a really good coach, like we have in Iron Health, is suitable because you need to know, should I regress this exercise? Should I do unilateral when it calls for bilateral? So one arm versus 2 arms, or one leg versus 2 legs, and understanding hey, I'm going to PT. Can they communicate with my trainer as well? Because that is a big factor as well. You need to have communication so you can train around things, because I know people who are fitness junkies don't want to stop. And you don't have to sometimes, and don't think that way. Sometimes you do, but sometimes you don't have to. And you can be like, with a good team, you can really manage it very, very well. So that's kind of my biggest thing about training around injuries. Now, if you're, an example would be if you're a basketball player and you sprain your ankle and you're like, I want to go back to playing basketball, there's certain tests and measures you have to hit before you play because you could hurt yourself really bad. But if you have like shoulder pain, you're like, I just want to go back to the gym. It's like, okay, tell me exactly what you do in the gym. These are the things I would not do. These are the things that you can do. And this is the things that I would add. So having a good team to know like you can train through injury is very vital because it would actually accelerate your injury recovery time.
For sure. And not having feedback that you can exercise is not only discouraging, but some people will do it anyway. So it's better to do it with the knowledge of what to do, what you can do, how it should look, versus being like, I'm not listening to this person. I know I've been there before, and then doing it anyway and probably just making it worse.
Yeah, and as you get older, I mean, that's something to note. Every year you age, your body doesn't recover as fast. So understanding that component of it and be smart and be ahead of it. Don't just blow past what people are telling you. Like find someone or find a team that's going to help you get through an injury so you can continue doing what you love. I think it's the most important thing.
If you are looking for help with programming or working out and doing the right workout to help you meet your goals, we can definitely help you out at Iron Health. And otherwise, I will say in terms of figuring out what works for you and having discernment, if you're looking online, just really truly understand what your goals are. Not everything works for everybody either. And just be mindful if you have a certain goal, a certain type of workout, whether it's something you really love to do or that you're drawn to, it might not be the right fit for you. So it is important to just understand that and to know, okay, I'm looking at this online. What is this telling me? And understanding, is it going to help you meet your goals? I will say for things, and these are foundations and principles. There's complexities with these too. It could be a specific injury. It could be the reason behind that injury. It could be a hormonal thing. So you're doing a certain type of workout for your goals and you're still not seeing results, and you just need to dive deeper. And so it's not just, unfortunately, like, here's the answer. Just have some discernment when you're looking at these things, and there's always people out there that are able to help. So just make sure you link up with the right person or group of people.
Yeah, if you got any value, just leave us a comment, a like. We like doing these. We want to do more of these. Your feedback is important for us.
Thanks.
Thank you.